We did the San Francisco 1906 earthquake.
We researched the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, which occurred because of tension on the San Andreas Fault. The fault splits the state of California into two parts, and as you can see, many cities that fall along this fault are inclined to damage from earthquakes. The 1906 earthquake is very important because it destroyed San Francisco, which gave a wake-up call to the nation that earthquakes are something to be taken seriously.
Basic information. The earthquake happened on April 18th, 1906 at 5:13 in the morning in San Francisco, California. It was one of the most significant earthquakes of all time because it did a lot of damage. It had a magnitude of 7.8. Most people think this earthquake only affected San Francisco, but in reality, it was strongly felt from the southern part of Oregon to central Nevada. It is known as the San Francisco earthquake because there was a huge fire in San Francisco that did a lot of damage. The epicenter of the earthquake was around 60 miles from San Francisco. The earthquake lasted less than 1 minute.
So the fires. There were many fires that were produced because of this earthquake, and that was what caused the most damage of the 1906 earthquake. So it's fires plural because there were over 30 individual fires together that destroyed the city, and they were unable to be put out for a long time because of the earthquake damaged the city's water pipes, and they were broken, so there was no water to fight the fires with. And the fires lasted for a total of 3 days, and they were sparked by many different occurrences, two being people dropping candles during the aftershocks because they weren't prepared for them, and inexperienced firefighters that accidentally used dynamite to try and fish people out from the rubble. One of the largest fires was known as the Ham and Eggs Fire, which has a unique story. It started when a woman was cooking breakfast for her family, and she turned on a stove, which sent the whole building into flames, and that was most likely due to a gas leakage.
So the destruction caused by the initial earthquakes and fires. So many roads, fences, rows of trees, and bushes were offset by many yards. The ground west of the fault moved north, so there was a lot of ground movement. About 3,000 people died. Total damage was worth about $500 million in 1906 dollars, so that would be equivalent to a lot more today. There were over 28,000 buildings damaged. 490 city blocks were destroyed. 250,000 people were left homeless. 80% of San Francisco was destroyed. Telephone and telegraph communications were cut off. And from April 1906 to December 1907, there were a series of smaller aftershocks on the San Andreas Fault.
Why was there an earthquake? There was an earthquake in the San Francisco region because this area is near the San Andreas Fault. The San Andreas Fault is a strike-slip fault in which two moving plates, the Pacific and the North American plate, meet in western California. The whole San Andreas Fault is 800 miles long, one of the longest strike-slip faults in the world. Blocks on the opposite side of the San Andreas Fault move horizontally. Offset of the fault is what is causing earthquakes. The worst earthquakes happen when one section of the fault has remained locked for a very long time, and therefore hasn't had an earthquake in that area for a long time. This means that a lot of strain is building up, and when the strain is finally released, a large earthquake is produced.
So the San Andreas Fault is a widely known Californian fault, and it's known for some of the worst U.S. earthquakes. So the fault moves at a rate of a few inches a year, but the reason that there are so many earthquakes is because when they stop moving the plates, the pressure builds up and then it cracks, causing both plates to move a few feet at once rather than a few inches. So the fault is predicted to crack very soon for one dangerous reason, because that there's not been a severe earthquake on the fault for many years, meaning that there's a bunch of pressure building up between the North American plate and the Pacific plate, which is moving even faster than the North American plate. And many people think that if another big earthquake happens, that a large tsunami will be formed, as depicted in the movie San Andreas, which was a film that showed very bad predictions of what would happen on the San Andreas Fault. But that's not true, because if one of the plates were to slip and flip upwards, the gap in the floor would not be big enough to create a big wave such as a tsunami.
So there were some benefits of the 1906 earthquake. The city of San Francisco was able to improve. So basically, what this means is since the fire destroyed most of the city, the destruction allowed for city planners to create a new and much improved city. Also, it was beneficial to Chinese citizens because all immigration records were lost in the fire, giving the Chinese citizens the Chinese immigrants a longer stay in the U.S. Also, hastily after the earthquake occurred, the mayor of San Francisco at the time assembled the Committee of 50. The committee took over governing tasks. One rule implemented by them was to shoot or imprison anyone caught looting, burning, or destroying houses. This helped put a more secure stretch on things until the city was rebuilt. The committee also convinced Theodore Roosevelt to fund relief and repair aid for the city, which helped rebuild businesses faster than normal, which they thought would eventually help the population too. Permanent refugee camps were also set up for the homeless, but those who stayed there were forced to help clean up the city. So basically, this means that ever since the 1906 earthquake, there have been refugee centers which have helped many earthquakes that happened afterwards.
So there have been other historic earthquakes in the area of the San Andreas Fault. One important one is the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989, and this happened on October 17th, and it was a 6.9 magnitude earthquake that struck at 5:04 p.m. and killed around 70 people. The shaking was severe around San Francisco and Monterey Bay areas, and San Francisco's Marina District suffered intense damage. After the 1906 earthquake, the city decided to bury rubble and trash from the earthquake underground, but eventually this grass grew in the rubble and people forgot trash was underneath, so new buildings were constructed on top of this trash, but these buildings were destroyed because the soil was too loose for a building to be firmly stabilized during an earthquake. And the more central part of the city, such as the ballpark, suffered little to no damage because it was built on rock. In a large bridge in San Francisco, the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge collapsed during the earthquake.
So there's more historic earthquakes, which was known as the Owens Valley earthquake in 1872, and it occurred at 2:30 a.m. on March 26, 1872, and it killed around 30 people. And so the ground moved on the fault 7 feet horizontally, which is a lot for an earthquake. And when the earthquake hit Lone Pine, it destroyed 52 out of the 59 homes that were in the town, and it killed 27 out of the 30 people in their sleep. And the earthquake had a magnitude of 7.8, like the 1906 one. And it was able to be felt all the way in Tijuana, Mexico. And there were about 1,000 aftershocks in the next 2 months after the quake, but none of them were deadly enough to kill or damage anything.
So another historic earthquake was the 1857 Fort Tejon earthquake, and it occurred on January 9th. The epicenter of the earthquake was not in Fort Tejon, it was actually in Parkfield, a town in Monterey County. The earthquake was named after Fort Tejon because it was the most populated area near the fault, making it have suffered the most damage. The 1857 earthquake was larger than the 1872 earthquake in Owens Valley, and equally or even larger than the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco. The magnitude was around 8. Fort Tejon suffered from aftershocks of the main quake for many months later. If other areas near Fort Tejon would have been more populated at the time, they would have suffered just as much damage as Fort Tejon. This is known as the last big earthquake along with San Andreas Fault, and another earthquake along the fault is overdue, meaning when it does happen, it's going to be huge because stress has been building.
Prospects for future earthquakes there. So California has a 99% chance of having a magnitude 6.7 or larger earthquake in the next 30 years, and there's a 63% probability that it will hit in the San Francisco area. And the average plate movement of the San Andreas Fault for the past several million years has been about 2 inches per year. And the last major earthquake on the San Andreas Fault was the San Francisco 1989 one, with a magnitude of 6.9, and strain has been building up since then. Scientists have discovered that the San Andreas Fault and the San Jacinto Fault are capable of rupturing together and might have in the past, creating a very large earthquake. And the 1812 earthquake in California brought light onto this theory because the San Andreas Fault could not have done it alone, considering the fault only ruptured 40 miles long, which was too short for a 7.5 magnitude earthquake.
So how are the earthquakes being dealt with in the San Francisco area along the San Andreas Fault? So most people and families in San Francisco area are very aware that there's a possibility of an earthquake, and they know how to prepare. So most people have a disaster supply kit, which is like highly recommended, and it includes water, non-perishable food, a first aid kit, and copies of important family documents like immigration or such things. Also, people have decided a safe place to go during an earthquake. So this place will have the disaster supply kit and helmets for children in case of falling objects. This is a safe place that must be away from windows, hanging objects, mirrors, or tall furniture, because if any of the above fell or cracked, you could be severely hurt. And ideally, you should have sturdy furniture to hide under in a safe place, but if you do not, then you cover your head with your arms to protect yourself from falling debris. And also, if you are outside during an earthquake, get out into the open to avoid things falling on you.
So in California, children are taught drop, cover, and hold on. This means drop to the floor so that you won't be knocked around by the earthquake, cover your head with something sturdy or your arms, and hold on to something sturdy. If you are in the car during an earthquake, stop the vehicle, but avoid stopping near telephone poles, wires, trees, overpasses, bridges, and other buildings in case they would fall on top of you.
So, building engineering. The 1906 earthquake in San Francisco taught engineers to make buildings safer by protecting them from earthquakes. The following are ways to make buildings safer. The first way is to make buildings ductile. And ductility of buildings means their ability to bend without breaking, and it's a key part of earthquake safety. Steel is a very ductile material used in buildings to withstand earthquakes. Another method is damping. Damping is another method used to make buildings more protected from damage in an earthquake. Dampers are used in place of diagonal braces and act as shock absorbers for the building, reducing the swaying motion.
So more building engineering methods. So there's something called base isolators, and the use of base isolators is the most effective form of earthquake protection. They separate a building from its foundation, allowing the building to move separately from the ground motion, so the building rests on the isolation bearings instead of connecting to the concrete foundation, which is being shaken. Some buildings that use seismic isolation in San Francisco are the D. Young Museum, City Hall, and the Asian Art. The use of base isolators makes the shaking of the building only 1/3 as much as it would be on the ground, and that greatly minimizes the damage done to buildings on the earthquakes.
Another building engineering method is cross-bracing, and cross-bracing increases a building's ability to withstand an earthquake because it provides extra support.
Another form of building engineering is using pendulums and inverted pendulums. So a large pendulum is placed in a building when an earthquake occurs, and the earthquake jolts the building one way, but because of something called inertia, the weight tries to stay where it is, giving the appearance of as if it's moving the opposite direction. This allows for the building to balance out.
So here's an example of building engineering in San Francisco. The Transamerica Tower, it has a 52-foot deep foundation built of steel and concrete, which is designed to move with earthquakes, and it uses cross-bracing above the first floor. It's 853 feet tall, and it has a steel spine, and it sits atop small pyramids and triangles, which is another form of base isolators to reduce the shocking.
So how could earthquakes be dealt with? San Francisco is due for another earthquake soon, as we've mentioned, and the city needs to prepare for it. If an earthquake hit, there would need to be shelters for people who cannot live in their houses. 95% of housing in San Francisco needs to meet the shelter-in-place standard. San Francisco has an emergency shelter for 60,000 people, but there are about 85,000 houses that don't meet the shelter-in-place standard. Neighborhood support centers could be made to offer relief and aid to communities. They could be where people go to find or get supplies, shower, charge their cell phones, or get a volunteer inspector to determine if a building is habitable or not.
The San Francisco 1906 earthquake was one of the most damaging earthquakes to ever occur in the Bay Area. This earthquake caused damage not only through its initial shock, but also through huge fires that have fallen. In total, thousands of citizens died, over 20,000 buildings were demolished, and millions of dollars in damages were lost. Many large earthquakes followed, and there were predictions for even bigger ones in the future. The reason for this, the San Andreas Fault, which runs through California and has produced some of the largest earthquakes in the U.S. Unfortunately, though, this fault has not ruptured in a long time, meaning stress is building. To prepare for the inevitable future earthquakes, there are now laws and measures required in California to ensure safety in building structures to prevent major damage.
Here are our sources.